Hey guys, what's cracking? Welcome back to another book review video. I am Graham, an author, illustrator, and truck driver in Oklahoma City. Go read my book. Today I finished two audiobooks while at work. They weren't both short, but I started one yesterday, so kind of cheated. I'll get the shorter of the two out of the way. It just dropped today on the 19th of November. It is Tooth and Claw by Craig Johnson. This is a novella in his Longmire Mysteries series. Chronologically, it's listed as .5. So it happens before, like way before, the first book in the series, The Cold Dish. This is a book that was recently hinted at from when Walt and Henry were up in Alaska briefly. This was right after Walt came back from Vietnam, but before he really got underway with his law enforcement career in rural Wyoming. He was personally a little bit adrift, and although he was still recently somewhat newly wedded to his wife Martha, their marriage was canonically on the rocks in the early days. And they explored that a little bit more in the 13th book series, The Western Star. But it kind of explains like one of many reasons why Walt was up in Alaska doing security on an oil rig when things went sideways. As has been consistent with the Walt Longmire novellas, this is a combination of a couple of ideas that come together to make something really cool, but also something that doesn't overstay its welcome. In this case, there is some kind of, we'll say, like mutant bear monster. It's a deformed bear, but it's found a food supply. So even though it can't hunt conventionally, it still finds a way to eat and survive, and it's starting to pick off the oil rig workers. But on top of that, there is also an oil rig worker who's out doing the deed against other people, and Walt is trying to figure out what's the motivation and all of that. The typical sheriff bit where it's like, well, if there's a crime going on, what's the motive, what's the means, what's the opportunity, and he's got to do all of that against the backdrop of an Arctic winter. So perfectly timed for the cold season of the year. The audio, it's like 4.5 hours long. It's one of the shorter ones, but again, it's very, very good, and I like these little flashbacks. One of the problems that I started to have with the later Longmire mystery books before it hit its stride again was that there were a couple that felt like they weren't as strong as the prior entries in the series, and I wondered if he was losing steam. He's since found it again, and I think it helps that Craig Johnson is able to kind of like catch his breath by showing like a Walt prequel or a defining incident from earlier in his life that helps to establish his character and the kind of man that he is later on. I'm totally fine with reading more stories like that if Craig Johnson is going to continue to execute the way that he has. The other book, the bigger book that I finished, this was an ebook that I plugged into Speechify because it's by an indie author, and as is usually the case, we can't afford narrators for our fancy audiobook stuff, so I gave it the Speechify rigmarole. This is the first book I've ever read by an author named S.A. Ernster. On X, she says that you can just call her Shelby, so I'll just call her Ernster here. This is space opera feels like the wrong word, but it's definitely a sci-fi out in space, and I really enjoyed it. I thought that it was a cool premise. It was good execution on that premise. My main knock on this is that it's definitely the first in a saga. It's a little bit slow. It's not drudgingly slow, but I did find myself like wanting it to pick up the pace a little bit here and there. And by the time it ended, I thought, this is pretty much the Count of Monte Cristo if it ended just as Edmond Dantes got out of Chateau d'If. The establishment happens early on. We find our main character is a teenager named Atlas Viridian. He's raised by his single father. Mankind has settled various planets and systems and stuff out in the cosmos. And he is just coming of age, and he's about to go do his first job. He's told his his girl slash friend that he likes her, and they get all Twitter pated over each other. And he's like, "Yeah, I'm going to go do my first year contract out on some planet in space, and I'll meet you again in a year, and we'll see where we're at." And then, like within an hour of that happening, the Popos bust in and arrest him and arrest his dad, and they're like 99% sure that his dad is this super secret, dangerous terrorist guy, and that the kid knows about it, and they send him off to this prison planet where he's got to work off the monetary fine of his debt. And he does the math and compares that to what they're paying him, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm going to be 70 years old before they get me out of here. I got to figure out another way out of here." And so the bulk of the story takes place on this prison asteroid planet thing, which is called, I think it's DIEROK 88. It seems like a German name, and if that's the case, it would be pronounced D-Rock, but it might also be Dierock. And the series is called Kosmonauti. I'm going off of the pronunciations that Speechify was able to conjure up, so I could be completely butchering it. Shelby, if you're watching this, drop a comment. Let me know how I'm actually supposed to be saying these words. But the heart of the story then is like not just Atlas's yearning to get out of prison and get back to his life and to get his freedom, as you would expect from this kind of story, but it's also the relationships that he makes with other prisoners, male and female, in this prison, and what their motivations are. I compared it to the Count of Monte Cristo, but it's also kind of like the first few episodes of Andor, where he's on that one planet where they're going to do the heist, and he's getting to know the other members of the heist team and what their individual motivations are, and it felt a little bit like that, which again was another series that was very, very slow but very good. So my impression when I got to the end was like, well, if I'm going to get the complete story, I'm committed to a couple of sequels just based on how the pacing went in this first one. But it didn't feel like it was unnecessarily drawn out. It was just a slower burn. It didn't have to move at the pace of a thriller to get its point across. I think there was still enough meaningful things going on to justify the page count. I believe in print this is a 500-page book. So it's not insubstantial, it's not fluff, it's not something that she just dashed off. Like, you can tell a lot of effort and heart and meaning was put into it, and it lands well. I really like the cover art. I like the aesthetic and the feel of it, and it's just one of those where it's like you look at this really like almost traditional throwback type aura from the cover art, and it really feels like what's inside the text and the story itself matches the feeling of the cover, and I like that. There are times when like the author really goes hard on the cover art, and then you read the book and it's like, it just doesn't feel like it lives up to that one. This book lives up to its cover art. So overall, I want to give it like say 3.5, but I'll round it up to 4 stars. I want to know where it goes, and I wouldn't mind if the second book kind of picked up the pace. I feel like the building blocks are now well established, and I would like something that's just a little bit more exciting in a sequel, but we'll see where it goes. Good writing, good story, good characters. Content-wise, there's a couple of F-bombs, a couple of like smatterings of profanity here and there. It wasn't all the way through. It was just, it would pop up here and there, and it's like, oh yeah, like we're operating at this level of caffeination for this story. Understandably so. Like the more impactful moment of it was just like how much you empathize or sympathize with Atlas in this prison situation. It's like, yeah, this is 100% unjust, and if you were to start like just grabbing prison guards and snapping their necks, I don't think anybody would hold it against you. But obviously we're talking about a prison break. You got to be just a little bit smarter about it. So a ringing endorsement, I hope, for DIEROK 88, first in the Kosmonauti series. Dadgummit. Shelby, tell me how to say that, because I don't know how. Anyway, 2 endorsements. Hey, thank you for watching that. Did you know that I'm also an author? You can check the description for a link to my book, Mr. Friday. It's set in a future where Black Friday is militarized and televised, and the best Friday fighters end up getting sponsors and backing. But it just so happens that the very best of them actually wants to take the holiday down. When he's approached by a couple of other like-minded fighters, he jumps at the chance, and it goes haywire from there. This is a short novella, and it's available in ebook format for just 99 cents. Drive safe. See you out there.